ลำดับต่อไปนะครับเป็นปาฐกถานำในหัวข้อวิกฤตการเศรษฐกิจและพลังงานของสหภาพยุโรปนะครับเป็นผลกระทบและอนาคตครับขอเชิญมิสเตอร์มาร์ค ฮอปแมนขึ้นกล่าวด้วยครับขอเชิญครับ
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating at this seminar this morning. I would like to express my thanks especially to the Institute of Democratization Studies and Mr. Chaturon Chaisang for his warm welcoming remarks, as well as to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, a partner that I, as a politician, a member of the German Parliament, work closely together when it comes to international questions, when it comes to partnerships abroad, when it comes to putting our friendships together between Germany and other countries such as Thailand. And I decided for myself, by coming here to Thailand, to send out warm regards and many greetings from Germany. We are watching what's going on in Thailand. We look to Thailand as a partner in Southeast Asia and a very important partner. We welcome a process of democratization in Thailand. And we hope that our friendship and friendships also among the people, and many Germans also work in Thailand, live in Thailand, have relationships with Thailand, that those cooperations will enhance and further have good prosperity in the future. So this is my opening remarks, and feel yourself closely welcomed also by the German society and also by a German political actor like myself. As it was mentioned correctly in the outline of Mr. Winzer, I will talk about three major topics today. First, I will deal with a tough part by talking about the financial crisis, the euro crisis that we have seen in Europe since 2009-2010. After that, I will come through the way of crisis management, what we are doing in Europe in order to solve the crisis, to show you how Germany, as one example, is dealing with the crisis since 2009-2010 and how we are doing in this environment of a very difficult economic situation in Europe. And after that, I would like to present one major topic to you that both speakers have already mentioned before, which is our energy transition policy. Because it is the leading also economic policy that we are facing in those times that we are in and will face in the next couple of years to come. So let me start first by talking a little bit about the euro crisis and basically how the outcome of this crisis could be managed so far. When we talk about this problem, we see that this topic is now facing us as policy lawmakers, but also people in the economic environment since 2010, basically, where we now face the biggest political, social and economic challenges in Europe that we have seen so far. There were many different singular parts of this crisis. It started with a crisis in the United States as a financial crisis. If you look about subprime markets in the United States, how it all began, and then basically swapped over the Atlantic also into our economies that are closely linked to each other. So it started as a financial crisis. It then later became a debt crisis, meaning that we have countries in Europe, but I guess all over the world, where they should closely look what can be done within their countries without producing a high amount of debt, international debt mainly. And now the third phase that we are seeing in this crisis is that we are moving into a reform crisis. So there you can also already see the three different phases of this crisis. It started as a financial crisis, moved into a debt crisis, and now what we are facing is a reform crisis. And also we will see how the outcome of this crisis will be shaped in the next couple of years. When we talk about this crisis, and you can see it on this presentation, there were countries that were more affected by the crisis and others who were less affected by the crisis. But you see a couple of countries that are named here, mainly Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus and Greece. Just to give you a figure, to see that it's not only a crisis that occurred especially in the southern European states, but also in Germany. The number of GDP or a shrunk GDP that we faced in Germany was about 6% in 1 year. So our GDP basically went down for a huge percentage that we have never seen in history, mainly because of the fact that Germany is an export-oriented country. We are good in producing, we are good in services that we are selling internationally. You all know German products from the car industry, chemicals, but also in machines, and therefore we basically had a very difficult time when also the world economy, and especially the US market and other markets, went on an economic downshift. So the crisis was not only something that affected the southern European states, but affected all the European states. We then, of course, applied different programs in the European Union, and also bailout programs for countries especially affected of this crisis. And this bailout program basically was given by the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Those three partners together worked pretty closely together in order to also set out some measurements and some reforms necessary in those countries who were affected the most. And if you look now back 5 years ago, we see that Ireland, who was one of the first countries who had to jump into this under this financial umbrella, is now on a very good track, and they are in a very good position with GDP growth, and they left basically this bailout program. We also see that necessary reforms, especially in the wage system, in the political reform agenda, in the pension system, but also in the banking or in the financial system, have produced a very positive effect, especially in countries like Spain and Portugal. Both countries are now on a very good track, have GDP growth again, the unemployment rate is going down, and they are on the international market, funding themselves on international market without help needed from the European institutions. So if we look 5 years back, we see that a reform agenda, painful reforms, I'm talking about hiring, for example, the retirement age. I'm talking about political reforms or economic reforms, about wages that had to adjust to the productivity. So therefore, all those measurements were not very much liked by the people, of course, in those countries, but they were necessary to be right on track again. And therefore, those countries moved in the right direction. And then, of course, we also have Cyprus, which is doing good and was following this reform agenda as well. And now we have a special case with Greece, where we are negotiating with the Greek government almost on a daily basis. And I stand here as a member of the German parliament, and now you may ask yourself, why is a German parliamentarian talking about the issue in Greece? I can tell you. Because every measurement where the European institutions participate in the bailout program for Greece, it has to be approved in the German parliament. So we vote on this. And therefore we have to deal with those questions in Greece. We have to look into the country, what's going on there. We have to see, is this government a trustworthy government? Are they doing the necessary reforms, or are they putting the reforms aside? How are they willing to get themselves out of this crisis? And therefore, being a member of the German parliament nowadays also means you have to be a little bit of an expert on Greece politics as well. This is one part of the job, I guess. So, but I mean, it's a very difficult process, and the good way is that we have drafted an agenda that is basically linked to many international institutions like the Troika, the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the Commission, and they all work together closely. They send their experts to Greece in order to help them getting the reforms done. They advise the government. So basically, there is hope, and there is the strong will in Europe to keep the euro as a currency strong, and to keep Europe as a continent strong, that we will face those questions of the crisis in the future. So my first message is basically there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're doing good in crisis management. We had to face a very difficult time, but now we are on a good track. And to show you how this is basically linked to Germany, I want to talk a little bit about Germany and about the German role of this crisis. As you may know, Germany is the biggest economic country in the European Union, with a population of about 82 million. We are also the biggest country in Germany by population, and the most powerful economic country. Being like a core anchor within a continent, this also leads to the questions of how you lead, especially in a time of crisis, how you lead among the other European partners, our friends, our neighboring countries. And this is basically a task that Germany was asked in the last couple of years, and Angela Merkel, as the German Chancellor, from my perspective, did a remarkable job in putting herself into those difficult questions and to deal with the European partners and to find positive solutions that are basically worth fighting for. One part that Germany basically had to deal with when it comes to the crisis was that we did a very big reform agenda before we hit the crisis. It was a government decision in the early 2000s, a so-called Agenda 2010, so an agenda for the year 2010. Back then it was about, it was in the year of 2000, 2003 when they decided on this. And back then Germany was in a very poor condition. we were the weak man of Europe. The weak man of Europe basically meant we had high unemployment rates, we had an unflexible labor market, we had not done necessary reforms in the pension system, and we had a reform agenda that was quite big that we had to face, and we faced the decision to do necessary reforms that were not very popular in the German society. And our coalition partner nowadays, the Social Democratic Party, basically lost an election by doing reforms like this, and part of the party split even up. So they, for themselves, witnessed what it means to do necessary reforms. But those reforms that we tackled over 10 years ago made us ready to hit a crisis and to get out even stronger than we entered the crisis. And this was one of the strategic goals of Angela Merkel when she was Chancellor during the times of the financial crisis in 2009-2010. She said, we will use this opportunity because a time of crisis is also a time where you have new opportunities, where you basically blank out what is on the sheet and you have the chance to move in a different direction. And we used this opportunity, and with reforms in the labor market, which is much more flexible, with reforms of the pension system where we hired the pension age from 65 to 67 in Germany, 67 years, and where we made a lot of reforms. This basically made us ready to hit difficult times. And of course, back then we didn't know that a financial crisis would occur in 2009-2010. But it helped us very much to go through the crisis and to find also packages, stimulus packages where we stimulated our economy that helped us to go through the crisis. And if you look now at economic figures of Germany, we have the best economic figures since German unification 25 years ago. And some of the figures have not been seen in the past. For example, we have now over 43 million people in the workforce. It's the highest number we have ever seen. We have the lowest youth unemployment rate since 25 years. And for example, if I take my own constituency, and I was born in the former eastern part of Germany, in the GDR, a region in Germany that had a lot of difficulties with unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in my constituency is now below 5% and is below the German average. And this, after 25 years of German unification, I would say is quite a success story to see that we are now having really good economic numbers. We were able to draft a budget for the whole country, which is the first balanced budget since 1969. So we don't produce any debt anymore. It's the first time since 40 years. And this is basically also one result of this crisis that we faced 5 years ago. The times where we can consume and basically send the check to the future, to future generations who then have to pay for this, is in my view completely over. So we have to think about what can we consume, what can we do as a state, and how can we live in a society without producing more and more international debt. Because this is especially the way that was leading us into this crisis. So therefore, balanced budgets is something that is really important for us, and we were even able, for the first time since many years, to pay back our debt that we have made in the past. And Mr. Winzer was correctly when he said in Germany we have a special program or a special fundamentum on which we are doing business, on which we are getting our economy in shape, and this is the social market economy. And this is a concept that I would like to share with you, because we as Germans believe that this is also a balanced approach between, on the one hand side, a free market economy where everyone can have new and fresh ideas, who then produce amazing products on the one hand side, and who can have competitive products on the world market. But on the same hand, as the different side of the same coin, so to speak, we also need a social balance in order to keep a balance within the society, to provide help for those who need help in a society. And this is an agenda that goes back to the founding fathers of our society. On the picture you can see Konrad Adenauer, our first elected chancellor in 1949, together with his back then Minister of Economics, Ludwig Erhard, and they drafted this idea of a social market economy. And this basically helped us very much, especially during a time after World War II, where you have to imagine where Germany was completely destroyed to the grounds, and where everything had to be built up once again. Same situation like in Japan after World War II, when the Japanese also built up their country in a similar way. So this concept of social market economy helped us, of course, also with international support of the Marshall Plan, of international financial support, especially from the United States after World War II. But it basically helped to develop a driving economy where we had full employment rate in the 1950s and 1960s, and where we had high GDP growth, and also we were able to introduce social reforms, pension system, a wage system that was there for the people who were in need. And I would like to talk about those principles of the social market economy to show you that this is a platform where you can basically do quite a good economic policy. First, let's take the perspective. I want to talk about 4 perspectives here, and the first perspective is the perspective of the economy. And any economic activity serves the man, or basically serves the society, and not vice versa. Economic players are not ahead, but they are part of the society. And also economy and the production of wealth are not goods in themselves, but a mechanism to improve the living conditions for each member of the society. The second perspective is the perspective of the individual. And when you look at the individual, you basically will see that on the one hand side, the individual takes an active responsibility for himself, but he also takes a responsibility for the community, as well as the community takes an active role for the individuals who are in need. So therefore, every individual in a society has the right to develop his own potential, but as well he has also the right to, or he has the obligation to make good use of his potential, but also to also support other members of the society as well. And this is very much one of the key parts of this social market economy, one of the principles, self-fulfillment, self-responsibility on the one hand side, but also to support the state in order to spread out social balanced approaches and to help the state in order to be able to be an active partner in this social market economy. The state also has some obligations as well. The state is providing the order under which condition basically this social market economy has to work. And it's a balance between social solidarity on the one hand side, but also economic freedom on the other side. It's not communism. It's not that we want everyone to be the same, but we want to create equal opportunities for everyone, so that everyone has the opportunity and has the chance to work within the society and to produce a maximum out of this. And this basically means that we also have tariff autonomy. So when the wages are negotiated in Germany, they are negotiated without state intervention. They are negotiated between the employers and the unions, and they together negotiate the wages. The state takes one step back and is not intervening in this process as well. Also, social market economy means that we need a solid legal base. So the legal rights, but also the social rule of law and public law as well as civil law, which is dealing in this under these circumstances. Regulations means that we have encompassed tax law and social law, contract law, labor law, so all kinds of different forms of laws where the state basically sets the grounds under which circumstances the society works. And the fourth perspective is the society itself. The society has a responsibility for solidarity, and this basically means that solidarity can give social peace, stability, and long-term success for a story. Why should we have a society where only the rich can be richer and the poor are always left behind? This basically would mean that unrest, social problems, and also clashes of parts of the society will increase over time. And I would argue this is not a stable environment. So therefore you need a sort of balance between the different parts. You need on the one hand side people who can grow economic wealth, but who then also have the responsibility to share part of this wealth with the others who are left behind. And this is the German model. This is the German model where we basically try to find a balance between different parts of society, where we try to find a balance between those who are capable of doing great things and who are producing amazing goods and who are tremendously successful, and we are putting them into the opportunities of being successful. But on the other hand, we also pledge to them, take your own responsibility as a company or as an individual in this part of society, because you also benefited from this society when it comes to the question of education, when it comes to the question of infrastructure, when it comes to the question of how we support, for example, families, how we support children. So everyone in the German society benefited from this social market agenda, from those principles. So then it leads to the question of giving something back as well. And here you can see on this chart basically how solidarity and subsidiarity is organized in Germany. And solidarity basically, of course, means that you have responsibility for the others as well, aid for the vulnerable. But subsidiarity is one of the key principles not only in Germany but also in the European Union. And it is drafted in the Treaty of Lisbon, the latest treaty that we have in the European Union, the fundamentum of subsidiarity. And you can see it on this chart. Subsidiarity basically means you have to solve a problem on the lowest possible platform. So first, when a problem occurs, you have to look, can this problem be solved within a family or among individuals before asking others to step in. When a family cannot solve this problem, the question of churches, clubs, parts of society comes into consideration. The next step are local government, municipalities. Can they provide services and help to those who need a certain help? And if the municipalities and the local government are not able to do so, then the question goes to the higher level of the state. And then, of course, when the state cannot provide it, it goes to the next highest level, which is the federation. Germany is a federal state. We have 16 states within Germany, and only if the solution cannot be drafted within one state, it goes to the higher level of, for example, the German Parliament. And now we also face, in a time of globalization, of regionalization, we face problems that states cannot solve themselves. So it goes to the higher level, and this is the European Union. And we see that the European Union is getting more and more important of solving international questions when it comes to the question of environmental protection, when it comes to certain regulations, for example, where the German market or the economic market in Luxembourg or Malta is too small in order to survive in international competition. So we need regulations on the European level. So this is why Europe has a central piece in this political system and is more important than ever in order to stay competitive as a region and over time. And I talked about environmental protection already a little bit, and I want now to shift over to one of the core examples of how we as Germans see environmental protection, but also how we see energy and energy production as one of the major targets for the political landscape in the future. Germany took a decision in the early 2000s to get out of nuclear power production and to completely switch the economic policy back from nuclear and fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. And it was decided that by the end of 2022 there will be no nuclear power production in Germany anymore, and that the renewables will have a huge share of the energy production that is needed and that is provided. And as a member of the Economic and Energy Committee in the German Parliament, I basically have to deal with those issues almost on a daily basis, because it means that we need also like a roadmap. How do we get there? How are we managing this process as an industrialized state? And Germany is a heavily industrialized state, and therefore it is much more complex to organize this process from one energy production to a complete different source. So we have the name of Energiewende, which basically means nothing else than energy transition. And energy transition is now becoming a major force for not only the last 10 years, but for a whole generation. It's a generational process. And a process that is the biggest infrastructure project since the post-World War II reconstruction of Germany. And you all remember when in 2011 the Fukushima incident happened in Japan, and sadly so many people died because of this incident in the Fukushima province. And back then, German Chancellor Angela Merkel decided to even increase this turnaround of our energy production. 9 nuclear power plants were shut down immediately after Fukushima, and the remaining, just as I said, will be shut down until 2022. And as a result, of course, this means that there's a massive extension of the use of renewable energy sources. And the sort of renewable energy sources is a different mix. It's wind power, it's biomass, it's solar power, it's thermal heat from the earth, it's also water power. So there are different sources that can apply under different circumstances depending on the geographic situation of the country. For example, we have a coastline in the north where we have onshore and offshore wind capacities. But we also have a mountain region in the south where we have biomass and water power that can be much more efficient, be used than in other parts of the country, and therefore we need a mix of different styles, different types of renewable energy sources in order to have a successful turnaround. And there are basically 5 goals of our energy transition period. The first goal is to exit nuclear power, because we believe that if an incident like Fukushima can happen to a heavily industrialized, modern country like Japan, it can also happen to a country like Germany. Maybe not with a tsunami, but maybe, for example, with a terrorist attack or with something else. Such an incident can occur. So why risking the worst if you can prepare for the best? The second goal of this energy transition is we want to reduce our energy dependency in the terms of oil and gas. Oil mainly of the Middle East, of a region which is not always the most stable region in the world. Just look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at the turmoil in the Arab states in northern Africa, and you will see that there's a huge conflict potential in the region, and to be dependent on this region means you basically give out your own cards into the hands of others. But also, let's be honest, Germany and whole Europe is heavily gas dependent on Russia. And what we have seen in the last 2 years is basically a policy of Russia that is not negotiable for us within the European Union, where one country basically takes a piece of the other country by force, and where there's an open conflict in eastern Ukraine with active Russian participation. So reducing the dependency on Russian gas is also the second fundamental goal of our energy transition. The third goal is basically the development of new technologies and a new economy. I'll talk about that a little bit later. The fourth goal is the improvement of climate protection. This is something where we welcome Thai support, Asian support, Chinese support, because this is something that cannot be done by one country, of course. This can only be done in the whole global society, where everyone has to provide its share. And the fifth goal is a motivation for other states to follow our way as well. So we are actively promoting this. Thanks to the help of the Adenauer Foundation and to other international partners, we go abroad, talk about it, and we deal with all kinds of questions that you can also raise later on by talking about what is working in a good way, what are our conclusions where other countries could learn from the German way and could do it even faster or better. We're not saying that everything is working perfect here, but we are saying it's the right track. Yeah, and if you want to follow, if other countries want to follow, they are more than welcome to do so. So how is the energy transition organized in a German state? The energy transition basically means that we want to actively engage parts of our society. And this is a direct link to social market economy. We tell the German people, if you put your money, your investment to the bank, you get maybe like a 2% increase of your financial values there. But if you basically put it into this process of the energy transition period, and you buy a solar panel and put it on the roof of your house, you have a turnaround of maybe 7 or 8% of an increase of your own values. So we basically give an example to the society. Take your share in this process. Actively engage. And it is a profit for you as well. It's not only a profit for the society, for the environment, but it's a financial profit for you as well. And this is basically how we organize it, how we subsidize the renewables, and how this transition period at the end is paid by everyone who pays his energy bill at the end of the month. If you pay your energy bill, you not only pay for what you have consumed, but you also pay a certain cent increase on top, which is basically used to organize this subsidiarity process, or this process of subsidizing renewable energy forms for the whole society. And here on this chart you can basically see how our energy mix was by the year of 2014. And you will see that over half of the energy is still fossil fuels, 52.7%. Nuclear power, almost 16%. This will be completely shut down to zero by the year 2022. And you can see that by now the production of renewables is already over 1/4, over 25%. By the year 2015, it's over 27%. This is a number from 2014 when it was 26.2%. And you can also see how it sums up in the different fields of the renewables. You will see that wind power has the biggest share, then biomass, solar and hydropower as well. And in the future, this electric power will basically have a bigger share of the renewables in the years to come. So we will basically see an increase of the renewables by 2020, which will be at least 35%. It's more likely that we will even see 40%. by the year 2025, 55 to 60% by the year 2035, and by the year 2050 we want to produce 80% of our energy that is needed in a renewable way. So this basically also shows that it is a question for generations to organize this process. And if you look into the German parliament, you will find different political parties. Right now we are 4 parties in parliament, but a lot more other parties who also actively engage into this conversation and into this dialogue. And until Fukushima, we always had a clash between the political parties. Should we get out of nuclear, yes or no? And it was my party, the Christian Democrats and Angela Merkel, who said, for reaching out our climate goals, we need nuclear power for the next couple of years. But Fukushima basically turned this around, and now you will find a conclusion where all the different political parties, may they be different in many other fields, they all agree to the same goal of this energy transition. The only difference is they all have different approaches how we reach the goal. So they say we should be faster or slower, we should put more efforts into wind or more efforts into solar. So there are differences among the political parties, and we have a debate and negotiations about this. But we all reach out to the same goal, and I think this is something that is very positive within the political landscape to work for the same goal there as well. So if we look basically at the different parts where we can also reduce the need for energy, we see that especially a reduction of electric power consumption to be more effective, to improve the building's heating demand, is something that is very, very important, also to decrease greenhouse gases and to look of a most efficient way to transport the energy from one region to the other. So this is basically going into a little bit more of the details, but it basically shows that we have very high long-term goals when it comes to this question of energy transition, and we also try to be efficient as possible. A form of energy that is not needed in your household because you basically have your house in a better shape that it needs much less energy, doesn't have to produce, doesn't have to be transported. So it's the most efficient way to reduce the energy needs of a society as well. And we look into this from different fields. We look into electric cars on the one hand side, on the housing part, on all different fields. Also, when it comes to big companies or even smaller companies, how they produce goods, how they produce machines, they all look for a more efficient way to organize those processes without using a very high amount of energy. It puts money into their pocket because they don't have to pay for it, and the society doesn't have to basically develop those energy forms and to transport it from one region to the other. So the heat demand of buildings will be reduced by 80% in 2050. So we are looking for households who basically are energy neutral, who produce as much energy as they consume energy. And there are different ways of organizing this, but we are on a very positive and good track when it comes to the heat demand of buildings. The final energy consumption on transport will be reduced by 40% until 2050. So there are a couple of different targets, also the decrease of 80% of the energy consumed if you compare it, or if you compare the 2 years 1990 and 2050. So within 60 years, with a higher standard of living, with higher GDP growth, reduce our energy by about 80%. And this is the tough question that we have to deal with, because of course we want not to be put back into the Stone Age. We want to be a modern society. We want to be a society with a high standard of living. But on the same hand, we basically have to fulfill those targets as well. So how are we doing in this process? We're doing quite well so far. Like I said, over 1/4 of the electricity is produced with renewable energy sources by this year already. And if you come to Germany on a day like today in August, where it is windy and where we have a lot of sun, right now in Germany it's hotter than in Thailand. So we have temperatures in Berlin of almost 40 degrees Celsius. And if you come to Germany today, you will find that already today, in the year 2015, all the energy that is produced or all the energy that is basically needed is produced renewable. So it already works on specific days. The question that we have to deal with is, how does it work on a rainy day in, let's say, December without wind at night? So this is, you can see the difference, that storage of energy is a huge question. It's a huge technological gap that we want to decrease, and where we want to find solutions that we can store renewable produced energy for times when it cannot be produced. For example, during nighttime when solar power is out, or during times when the wind is not blowing, but we still need the energy there. So those are a couple of challenges there. The interesting fact is one thing. The energy transition costs us per year about 24 billion euros every year. It costs a lot of money. It is basically paid by all the individuals with their electricity bill. So it's something like a tax, if you can call it like a tax. But the interesting fact is, by having such high cost, it also has a positive effect on the side as well. We have created over 300,000 new jobs, green jobs for green technologies. So we basically have moved our workforce also into a new sphere and basically created a lot of jobs in renewable energies. And for example, we lost 30,000 jobs in the field of nuclear power, but we increased the number of people by over multiply it by 10. So we increased the number of new jobs to right now already 300,000 new jobs. So the economy has also a positive impulse for that. And if you look into those details, what kind of jobs you need mechanical engineering, plastic manufacturing, steel and chemical industry, electronics, all kinds of branches where we as Germans, with a logo like German engineering, are quite good at. So we increased jobs in this field, and this is also a very positive effect. As a result, I also want to talk about issues and challenges, of course, because, like I said in the beginning, this is something that we want to share on the international table, and where we see challenges, of course, and where we see a lot of topics that have to be dealt with in the future. The first is, if you change your energy consumption but also energy production, you also have to change the grid, meaning you have to transport the energy. And here you see a map of Germany, and you see the main electric autobahns, so the highways for how the energy is put from places where it is produced to places where it's consumed. There is a certain role in Germany. It's produced in the north and consumed in the south. So the production is much higher in the north than they can actually consume over there. But the consumption is very high in the south. But because of the geographical issues, they cannot produce as much wind energy as is needed there. So we basically need an expansion of the energy grid. The second question that we are facing as a challenge is the storage technology, of course. Right now we are looking into ways of different kinds of storages: hydropower, flywheels, battery technology, power to gas. So we basically change the source of energy and to put it, for example, into gas, because we have a very good functioning gas pipeline system in Germany that is already working there. So we will change the form of energy different times, and therefore this will help us lead to find solutions for the future. But of course there's not one solution. There are many solutions, and many solutions that are good. Battery storage is, for example, very good for very short ways to spread out the fluctuating measurements of the energy in the system. But battery storage cannot produce a storage for, let's say, days or weeks, so it has a certain weakness there. And therefore we are looking for reliable but also good solutions for the future. Another challenge that we have to face is, and which is also coming back to social market economy, we want energy to be affordable. People have to pay for it. So that means also those who are not the strongest members of society, but who have only a small income, should not, be phased out with that they cannot pay for their electricity anymore. So it needs to be affordable for all people of society. So it needs to be affordable for the business environment, for the business circle, because we can only be an internationally active exporting country when we are competitive. Right now, the energy price for the industry is 50% higher in Germany than in France, our neighboring country, and 80% more expensive than in the United States. That means we have to be 50% smarter by the way how we produce goods, or better with our goods, than our direct neighboring country, France. Just because we have a disadvantage when it comes to the prices of energy. And this basically also ultimately leads to the question that companies themselves have to think about: how can we be more efficient? How can we be more competitive on the international market? And this makes us strong for international competition as well. So by being forced to do something, you cannot relax and take a nap, but you have to actively engage and think about how you can produce better products, better services, consumer-friendly ways of producing, and also, if you have a disadvantage on the one hand side of the energy, you have to be better in other parts of the products as well. The third point is the energy, how we produce it nowadays, is more decentralized. Before, the energy transition, you had major power plants who are producing the energy and putting it into the system. Now everyone can be an energy producer. We enable farmers not to farm their land, but to produce their own energy with biomass. Farmers in Germany now are energy producers. They have solar panels on their houses. They have biomass energy sources on their land. And it's amazing to see that farmers who, sometimes are looked at a little bit, like a little bit backwards, how they produce only food and supplies, now are experts in the field of energy production. And they profit from it big time. So for them it's very profitable to engage into this process as well. But this also means it's a decentralized process. It's not, produced in only major hubs, major cities, major economic regions, but it's produced decentralized in many different areas, and everyone, basically, so to speak, can be part of this process as well. So this is providing, on the one hand side, an advantage, because you don't depend on centralized production, but it's also a challenge because you have to integrate the different production plants from all kinds of the country into one system that is sort of working. And of course there are political aspects as well. We in the German Parliament have to face decisions and have to make decisions how we want to go down further the roadmap. So we have to see how much we want to subsidize this process, in what areas we want to invest, where we want to invest in research and development, in which areas we want to invest of the different energy sources. So this also leads to changes where we learn from this process and then have to adapt it. I give you a very simple example. When we started this process of energy transition, we were looking at a very, very small plant. It was about this size. 6% of our whole energy production was renewable. And we watered this little plant, and we, did everything that it can grow. And now we're standing in front of quite a big tree. And this tree is the alternative energy source, and it now produces 27%. Just within 1 decade, we were able to increase from 6 to 27% in 1 decade. And now we have to adjust how we water the tree, how we harvest it, and so on. So you cannot have the same mechanisms how you basically take care of a small plant, but now you have to adjust the measurements and also the political measurements, how you deal with this increase of the renewables. The Germans in total as a society support this transition period, this transition process with about 70%. Whenever we whenever we question the people, do you support this? About 2/3, 70% say yes, it's a good thing, we're going into the right direction. So to put it in a nutshell and to end also my presentation, just an example from our German experience is, first, you have to actively engage people by participating into this process. Second, you have to talk about it, and you have to point out a vision. Where do we want to be in a couple of years ahead? What kind of society do we want to be? what is our share of the international community when it comes to climate questions, when it comes to environmental protection? What is our share? What can we do? Not only talk about it in the big process, but starting on a local process as well. And of course, people have to participate actively by investing into this process as well. If you empower the people by putting money into their pocket, they see that it's a good thing for themselves as well as for the whole society as well. So people empowerment, especially as a chance for rural areas, especially for a decentralized way of producing, is something that is quite positive, or where we see very positive effects. Also, that people trust in this process and believe that this is a good policy. So this is basically my presentation, where I started with a crisis and explained a little bit about how we came out of this crisis and were able to do positive crisis management. There are still obstacles on the road, no doubt about it. The biggest obstacles are in Greece, where we deal on a daily basis with this issue of this country as well. But it also shows that you can basically use a time of crisis with certain political visions to get out of the crisis even stronger than you entered it. And this can also maybe be a positive example for other countries as well, and maybe you can, take parts of this story as well and debate it here in Thailand. May it help you, may it help also debates that you are facing, and later I look back for interesting questions from your side. Thank you very much for your attention.